Salam world! I'm your shorter than average girl from down under, and today we're looking at one of the best stories to grace our screens, Howl's Moving Castle. This movie is absolutely stunning, and in my opinion, one of Miyazaki's best. I mean, he's known for his incredible animation and beautiful storytelling, but Howl's Moving Castle just hits different. And maybe it's because Miyazaki's sentiment and empathy come through in this movie. You see, Miyazaki made Howl's Moving Castle knowing that it won't be well received because it was his protest to the Iraq War in 2003. Miyazaki is a pacifist, so after winning the Oscar for Spirited Away in 2001, he knew that he could use his craft to convey his emotions about the US invasion of Iraq. And wow, did he convey it! Now, Howl's Moving Castle is inspired by a book of the same name, the first of Diane Wayne Jones's Howl series. Other than some of the same characters, elements of the plot, and mechanics of the castle, the two are very different. So instead of looking at the differences, today we're going to be looking at their similarities and how Miyazaki's adaptation adds to the original story. We will also be using the novel to explain some of the more obscure scenes of the movie which aren't as fleshed out in Miyazaki's work. But if you're only here for the movie review, please click on the timestamp shown on the screen right now or the one in the description, whichever suits you best. But for now, let's talk stories. So we're first introduced to Sophie, who's a timid girl working in her late father's hat shop. Sophie is the eldest of 3 sisters in the book and the eldest of 2 in the movie. And she just adores her family. She worries about them. She just wants them to be happy and everything. She doesn't really care that much about herself. Sophie doesn't really want to make her dreams come true. She's content with the life that she has as a hatter because something inside her thinks that this is what her father would have wanted. And so she doesn't really leave the shop unless she's going to visit her family. And this is where the movie starts off. So during the May Day festival, Sophie goes to visit her sister Letty, who works at the Cicere's bakery. And this is where she encounters the wizard Howl, after he saves her from these 2 bratty, entitled soldiers. This encounter made an impression on Sophie. I mean, she doesn't even know that the person who saved her was Howl. She just knows that they're a wizard. And Howl has like a really bad reputation in market shipping. But even still, when her sister was talking about Howl negatively, Sophie felt compelled to defend him. Then that evening, after she closes the shop, the Witch of the Waste comes and curses her.
The curse was to turn her into an old lady.
Now, in the movie, the reason why the Witch of the Waste curses her is because her goons saw her hanging out with Howl earlier that day. In the book, the reason is a bit different. But in both, part of the spell is that Sophie can't tell anyone that she's bewitched. And Sophie actually takes this curse pretty well, and she even surprises herself with how well she's handling it. But of course, she can't stay in the shop because none of the other co-workers will recognize her. And so she decides to leave market shipping altogether and see where life will take her. On the way, she rescues a bewitched scarecrow, who in turn finds her a walking stick and a warm place to stay the night.
You turnip head, that's Howl's castle. That is not what I meant when I asked for a place to stay.
Now, Sophie, despite her earlier remarks of Howl, is still afraid of him. Other than the fact that wizards and witches have a power complex, Howl himself is known as a womanizer. But she figured that she's an old lady, so Howl wouldn't want her anyway, so she goes into the castle. When she heads to the fireplace, she realizes that this is no ordinary fire.
I don't envy you, lady. That is one bad curse. Curses are tough. You're gonna have a very hard time getting rid of that one.
The fire spoke.
Let me guess, the curse won't allow you to talk about it, right?
Are you a Howl?
No, I'm an extremely powerful fire demon named Calcifer. I just like to do that once in a while.
So he decides to take advantage of this and strike a deal with Sophie. He'll let her stay in the castle and he'll help her break her curse, with the condition that she must break his contract with Howl. Now at this stage we don't know much about the contract between Howl and Calcifer because just like Sophie, Howl and Calcifer can't talk about their contract. How convenient. Sophie stays there and in the morning, Markel in the movie, Michael in the books, who is our Howl's apprentice. Anyway, they find Sophie inside the castle in the morning, but they don't have the heart to kick her out. In the book, we kind of get a backstory to Michael, which kind of explains why he didn't have the heart to kick out Sophie. Michael was kicked around from doorstep to doorstep because nobody in Port Haven wanted a homeless orphan to be sleeping outside their house. When he eventually made it to Howl's front door, he let him in. So I guess he related to Sophie, seeing her in the same boat that he was in a few years before. As for Howl, he wasn't too concerned that there was an old lady in his house. He was interested by how much control she had over Calcifer. I mean, he did wonder what she was doing there, but he was more impressed than angry that she walked in. And so Sophie then decides to become the cleaning lady so that it would give her the chance to snoop around and try and find some clues about Howl and Calcifer's contract and at the same time not be kicked out by Howl and kickstart the beautiful adventure. So in both the book and the movie, Sophie's still quite reserved about the use of magic, but she's fascinated by its wonder. And through their day-to-day adventures, she, Markel, and Calcifer actually build a genuine relationship. But Howl is like barely around, so he doesn't spend that much time with them. In the movie, he's out just trying to mess up with the war and try to escape being conscripted into the royal army, whereas in the novel version, he's out trying to find his next girl. At least that's what Sophie thinks until she finds out that he's actually been asking around about her because turns out he's trying to cure her from her curse. Because obviously Hal's a very powerful wizard, just like Calcifer, he recognized that he had a curse straight away. This isn't just in the novel. In the movie, he also finds out that she's cursed very early on. But don't get choked up about Howl and how good of a person he is. No, he is a coward when it comes to facing reality and his true self. See, Howl values his freedom, so much so that he doesn't want anyone to know who he is and where he is. Not only does he hide himself from people by living all the way out in the waste on a castle that constantly moves, he uses many aliases and spells to change his appearance. So any threat which comes to his freedom or people coming close to knowing who he really is, he goes into a full-on tantrum, complete with spells oozing down him just like mascara does after you cry. He wants to keep the fantasy that he's living in so badly that he doesn't care if his reputation is smeared and if he has to run away just to get people off his back. He's just selfish. Or at least that's what we're told by him.
I'm such a big coward. All I do is hide. And all of this magic is just to keep everybody away. I can't stand how scared I am. I give up. I see no point in living if I can't be beautiful.
But some of his actions speak otherwise.
This charm will guarantee your safe return. Don't worry, I'll follow behind you in disguise. Now, off you go. We can't just let them fly off with all those bombs.
What's happening? What did you do?
Just mess with it.
If he was so selfish, then why did he volunteer to mess up things in the war? And why did he help Sophie, Michael, and, spoiler alert, Calcifer? I believe that the way the novel and the movie explain how selfishness are different, but both can be true. And they're both linked to Calcifer. And I just need to add that in the book, Howl is way less likable, and he's a lot more childish and selfish. And so is Sophie. What I like about both the pieces of fiction is they give you hints and clues so that you can try and piece together Howl's curse, how Sophie's the antidote, etc. on your own, instead of spoon feeding it to us through like backstory. And yes, there is an argument made that Miyazaki's whole time travel element could be considered as a backstory, but let me just tell you that the novel's conclusion is a lot to take. I mean, you've got Frankenstein dogs, you've got a young witch of the waste, you've got traveling to the real world, and an unredeemably evil English teacher. Now, I'm not saying that English teachers are evil,
but this one is.
So yeah, both endings are quite complex and kind of rushed. But the most important thing is that Sophie saves both Calcifer and Howl by returning Howl's heart into his chest, and they end up finding the king's lost brother, Prince Justin. And yeah, it's as random as it is in the movie, in the book. In the world of wizardry, a witch or wizard can enhance their own magical ability by making a deal with a fire demon, which is a take on the classical sell yourself to the devil kind of trope. The longer one spends in the contract, the less and less human they become, until there is nothing left but a shell of who they were. But it's not necessary to have a deal with the fire demon to have magic. You can still have magic without the fire demon. Now, in the movie, it doesn't really say whether the Witch of the Waste has a fire demon or not, but in the novel, this is a huge plot point. The Witch of the Waste is so old that she no longer has anything to give to her fire demon, so she needs to give him a combination of Howl with Prince Justin and Wizard Solomon all together to her demon. So, yeah. Most witches and wizards usually make this deal for their own benefit, of course, but Howl does it because he pitied his fire demon. So essentially, fire demons are just shooting stars, and when they land, their life ends. Whereas most stars just accept their fate, Calcifer didn't. He was afraid of dying. So when Howl catches him and he finds Calcifer begging for life, he gives him his heart to keep him alive, because that's what keeps Howl alive. And in exchange, he just asks to be kept alive, and that's why Calcifer pretty much does most of the things for Howl. In that moment, they didn't realize the negative consequences of their actions. Howl thought he was doing something generous and good. But it turns out that both of them are just going to be bound to one another forever, with all the negative consequences of a demon-human contract happening to them both. It's not like they could just stop the contract whenever, because then Calcifer would die, and neither of them wanted that. Only one person can return Howl's heart to him without killing Calcifer, and that's Sophie. In the book, without Sophie actually knowing, she's a pretty good witch with a strong ability of being able to wish life into things. And so that's what Howl and Calcifer needed. They needed her to wish life into Calcifer so that Howl can have his heart back. Whereas in the movie, the audience is left to interpret Sophie's significance from all the previous events which have already occurred.
Calcifer.
Sophie, I'm so tired.
If I give Howl back his heart, what will happen to you?
I'll be okay if you do it, I think. I mean, you dumped water on me and Howl and I both survived.
Now, Sophie and Howl are very similar in many different ways. Most notably, their fear of the real world. Sophie was content with her life and never really strived to do anything for herself. I mean, she's convinced herself that, oh, this is because this is what her father wanted. But in reality, she feared the possible negative outcomes of stepping out of her comfort zone. And this is made abundantly more clear in the novel. She's like a bird who opts to stay in the cage in fear that if she leaves the cage, something bad would happen to her. But at the same time, she loathes herself for being so cowardly and not being able to do something with herself that she wants. Now, on the contrary, Hal is the exact opposite. He's like a bird that would fly anywhere just to avoid being caught. But it also means that he will avoid the best and most beautiful places because he fears a catcher will be there waiting for him. They both represent the two extremes of not wanting to take the responsibility for oneself. Both are quick to take responsibility for others, like Sophie for Letty and Hal for Markel and Calcifer. But they don't want to face life themselves. Both want to stay in the safety of the world that they have closed themselves in and want to save themselves from the harsh realities which exist in the real world. They both just want to keep their innocence and their childhood. And we can see that from the fact that they don't want to accept themselves and how they look and feel in the moment. Now, the Witch of the Waste is their counterpart. She represents all the harsh realities of the world. Old age, cruelty, selfishness, pride, betrayal, revenge, and so the list continues. She wants what Hal and Sophie have, and that's why she takes it away from them. Now, being cursed by the Witch of the Waste was a huge milestone for both Sophie and Hal, as it forced them to see the world's reality for the first time. Now, in the movie, Hal's curse is mentioned interchangeably with his contract with Calcifer, whereas in the novel, it's made clear that they are two separate things. I just thought that was important to mention. We will be talking about the two separately today, even though in the movie they're kind of combined. But anyway, for Sophie, this change in age forced her to leave her comforts and embrace the unknown. And to her surprise, she absolutely loved the real world. Yeah, there are scary parts in it, but it wasn't at all that bad. She also found her courage in her old age, probably because she was like, nobody would judge her for it because she's old. But she still loathed her previous self and didn't see herself as worthy of anything in life. So she would opt to be an old lady who is free rather than her small, unworthy and weak self, which she saw herself as, and as a consequence, she increased the strength of her own spell, which is why Hal's attempts of breaking it when she was asleep and when she wasn't knowing continued to fail. However, the more time Sophie spent with Hal, the more she started to understand him and draw parallels in what they want. She allowed herself to explore her needs and wants, and the more she did so, it reversed the age spell on her. And so she's letting herself break free of that cage and accepting both the beauties and the harsh realities of life. And then we get to Hal, which is a more complicated case. Now, there are two different things with Hal. One is his age when he gave his heart to Calcifer, and two is the curse on him. Hal was a child when he gave his heart up to Calcifer, so he didn't really understand responsibility and other mature feelings yet. So when his mind and body grew and started to mature, his heart didn't, because it wasn't part of his body anymore. And so his intelligence grew, his needs grew, but his feelings didn't. And one can only describe someone like that as a man-child, and that is literally what Howl is. He may want a girl, but he doesn't know all the nuances of how relationship works, and so he escapes at the first sign of commitment, etc., etc. When someone connects to Calcifer, who has Howl's heart, Howl forms a genuine connection with them, which would explain his relationship with both Markel and Sophie, because both of them had a strong relationship with Calcifer. In the movie, Howl's blossoming relationship with Sophie is what pulls him into reality more, as he learns to fashion his fantastical life to meet both their needs instead of just his own. As the two of them start to move out of the extreme lives that they were both living in, they start to want each other more, and that's because they complete each other. They helped each other out of their respective darknesses. Sophie, her struggle with seeing herself in a positive light, and Hal struggling with his humanity despite the strong imbalance of forces inside of him. And they both drive each other to a better and healthier lifestyle. They're each other's better half, which makes this romance so compelling. And most importantly, they helped each other become more selfless. Sophie, although she did everything for others, she would loathe herself because she's comparing herself to them. And that in itself is a selfish act. It was only when she became self-confident and stopped comparing herself to others, through her newfound freedom and form, she was able to act truly selflessly. And similarly with Howl, a person who would do everything just to make sure that he gets everything that he wants, he was willing to not only sacrifice himself but his humanity for the sake of making sure the person that he loves is safe. So it was in this state where she was just wishing for the sake of someone else that Sophie prayed for Calcifer and prayed for Hal, which allowed them to both have their own separate lives. And she ended up breaking the spell on the Scarecrow. What made Sophie so powerful was her ability of wanting something for someone else purely for their own sake. And that's why she tells Hal and Calcifer to go and find her in the future. Now, the womanizing personality for Hal is only mentioned here and there in the movie, but isn't seen much on screen. Whereas in the novel, it is a much more pressing issue. And for that reason, I'm not going to go too deep into it, but I'm still going to mention it. Essentially, the Witch of the Waste had already tried once to seduce Hal, but he didn't fall for it, and so she ended up cursing him. And the actual curse is a poem called Song, Go and Catch a Falling Star by John Donne. Now, this poem is from the 16th century and is discussing the infidelity of women. So the first stanza lists a bunch of impossible tasks. Then it states that finding a faithful woman has the same probability as everything in the first stanza. Howl's curse stipulates that after everything in the list of the first stanza occurs, then he will have to return to the Witch of the Waste, and she will be his final woman. At the same time, Howl is also cursed to never being able to find a faithful woman, because all the things on that list are impossible. But as soon as all these things do end up happening, he'll never be able to be with his faithful woman, because then he has to go to the witch. So depressing, man. But yeah, instead of going through the heartbreak of being cheated on, Hal ends up deciding to break up with every woman that he's with before things get too serious. And that's how he got his reputation. And if you haven't guessed it yet, Sophie was his faithful woman. So in the book, all the impossible tasks happen when Sophie is with Hal, except for the first one, of course. But there is a happy ending because Sophie breaks the curse, and so he doesn't have to end up with the Witch of the Waste, and They do live happily. But yeah, it's not exactly the most child-friendly subplots, but it's not very obvious from the novel, just saying. Like, you have to do a little bit of digging and kind of reading into Doan's poetry before being able to come up with this. As I said, this entire plot isn't even in the movie. But what does exist in the movie that doesn't in the book is the war. And this is a profound message from Miyazaki, which he adds to Jones's work. The message is there is no such thing as a villain in life, only evil actions. A bad action can make a bad person, but not the other way around. And so the only villain in the entire movie is
The war.
so essentially, the king's brother goes missing, and it's believed that the neighboring kingdom knows something about it. But they deny it.
And so, we shall go to war.
And so this is what leads to the horrific loss of life, the irrational fear, and the large-scale chaos throughout the kingdom. And it is the exact thing that Howl wants to stop. But what about the Witch of the Waste or Madame Sullivan? Aren't they the antagonists? Miyazaki wants to show us that every bad person has the ability to become good, and every good person has the ability to become bad, given the opportunities given to them in life. One mustn't label an individual based on what they see, because everyone has the ability to change given the right situation, just like the Witch of the Waste ended up doing and Madame Sullivan ending the war. But we don't determine that situation. It will come when the time is right. You just never know. There is so much that one can take from Howl's Moving Castle, but for me, the key takeaways are: we can't fight the natural course of life, but instead we should embrace it and venture through it. A person can only find a true relationship when they are selfless, and one can only be selfless if they have self-worth and accept themselves, flaws and all. And finally, there is no such thing as an evil person, but there are people who can do evil things and turn themselves bad, but they can always fix themselves and become good again. This movie has all the sparks of Miyazaki's previous works, but this is the one that he himself likes the most. I personally think that it's one of the clearer works of Miyazaki and one that can be easily understood, especially for a younger audience, and its message is beautiful and meaningful. Other than the illustrative war scenes and Sophie just hanging out kisses at the end, it's a very tame movie. I can guarantee it's not one that you will forget quickly, and Sophie's last words will stick with you forever.
A heart's a heavy burden.
I mean, how can I put it? It's a near masterpiece, no doubt about it. And if you don't fall head over heels for Howl or Sophie, then you're just lying, because it's impossible not to. That was the beautiful and wonderful world of Howl's Moving Castle. If you want to see this masterpiece yourself, please use a streaming platform that doesn't support the violation of human rights or the spread of negativity in the world. If you like this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on next week's drop, and comment on what other stories you would like me to cover on this channel. And remember, be brave, be happy, and be kind, and we'll catch you all next time.